Random House Audio presents Robert Altman, The Oral Biography, by Mitchell Zuckoff, featuring Ann Archer, Bob Balaban, Keith Carradine, Peter Gallagher, Elliott Gould, Sally Kellerman, Kevin Kline, Tim Robbins, Joan Tewksbury, Gary Trudeau, and Michael Murphy as himself and the voice of Robert Altman. With Catherine Reed Altman, Michael Altman, Stephen Altman, Robert Reed Altman, Matthew Altman, and Connie Courier. Narrated by Kimberly Farr and Don Leslie. With an introduction by the author, Mitchell Zuckoff.
Introduction. Robert Altman drew you in, enlisted you in his schemes, took what he needed and gave what you asked. He trusted that you'd be good, right for the part he'd cast you in, and unless you screwed up, he'd give you free rein. He pulled you onto his pedestal, passed you a joint, then rocked so hard you'd fall off together in a happy heap. Bob did all that with me, a writer he met near the end of his life, someone with whom he could talk movies, baseball, the glory of a well-turned female leg, movies, politics, family, friendship, and movies. At first, Bob was cool to the idea of a book. His medium was film, and he considered it dangerous and distracting to publicly analyze himself. He relented under the condition that I'd help him write a memoir of the art and craft of filmmaking, a book that would focus on his work and pay little attention to his personal life. He said his motive was a healthy paycheck from the publisher, and he meant it. Bob was far better at spending than saving. But he also knew he'd have a chance to talk about his movies, something he loved almost as much as making them. The deal was, when we were working, we'd talk film, not life. He didn't want stories of his past deeds or misdeeds to fog the lens, and he didn't want anything to hurt his family, especially his wife, Catherine Reed Altman. His one concession was a chapter that would sketch the broad contours of his past. We began talking in long sessions at his homes in Malibu and Manhattan, and at the New York office of his last company, Sandcastle 5 Productions. It soon became clear that the lines between his life and his work weren't just blurry, they were almost non-existent. After he returned from flying bombers in World War II, planning and making movies defined nearly everything he did. The films he eventually made weren't overtly autobiographical, not even Kansas City, which is a sepia-toned memory of a world he glimpsed as a boy. Not The Player, either. There's no evidence he ever killed a writer, though he might have fantasized about it. He didn't need to make movies about himself because the entire process of filmmaking was his adult life, a stage for his passions, his rages, his triumphs, his humor, his visions, his failures, his gifts. We talked more, and I secretly fretted that the limits he had set would make our book a clinical rendering of the outsized, extraordinary, flesh-and-blood man I'd come to know. Me, why'd you film the gunfight in McCabe in a snowstorm? Bob, because it snowed that day. My concerns got worse one night when we attended the Malibu Celebration of Film for a showing of his last movie, A Prairie Home Companion. The film had been out for months, and I can only guess how many times he'd seen it. But when we returned to his home, Bob was fuming. We'd sat in the second row, behind a couple and their antsy 12-year-old son. "If that fucking kid got up one more time," Bob growled, "I'd have strangled him and his father." Separating the man from his film, physically or otherwise, wasn't a good idea. A month later, Bob died. My concerns were trivial in context and swallowed by sadness. Academic as well. Our work was unfinished. But a new idea emerged. Our talks, Robert Altman's final sustained interviews, would form the backbone of a book about his work and his life, rough edges and all. Catherine agreed, recognizing that to understand the films Bob made and the man he was, the man she loved, meant examining the whole remarkable, complicated, combustible package. What followed for me was an Altmanesque tour from birth to death. Scenes took place in Kansas City, California, and New York, with side trips to such places as Burlington, Vermont, and Plum Island in Massachusetts, and phone calls throughout the United States, Canada, Europe, South America, and even to a movie set in Morocco. The cast was huge and varied, from A-list stars to complete unknowns, many from the world of film, but some purely from the world of Altman. Bob told me that he and his co-writers created 48 characters in A Wedding only because that was double the number in Nashville. It was a conceit, a caprice. He wanted to see how many individual voices he could establish in a celluloid choir without drowning the audience in cacophony. It took nearly 4 times as many characters to survey his life. Their thoughts, reminiscences, opinions, regrets, praise, criticism, and in some cases their dreams, are presented here in something approaching chronological order. That's not to say the result is a neat, complete tale, with a moral and a point and a bow on top. That isn't Bob. He didn't think much of linear storytelling, and he wouldn't have wanted his life rendered that way. In fact, he disliked the word story, believing that a plot should be secondary to an exploration of pure, or even better, impure, human behavior. He also hated the ventriloquism of a single writer's voice emanating from many diverse characters, as if a baker and a surgeon, or a phone sex worker and a grieving jazz singer would use the same syntax. See Shortcuts again if you doubt that. He loved the chaotic nature of real life, with conflicting perspectives, surprising twists, unexplained actions, and ambiguous endings. He especially loved many voices, sometimes arguing, sometimes agreeing, ideally overlapping, a cocktail party or a street scene captured as he experienced it. Bob was no more conventional when he wasn't behind a camera, and I tried to reflect that, too. As James Caan says, in Hollywood, trust me is code for fuck you. Bob didn't speak in code. In a world of air kisses and backstabbing embraces, he spoke his mind. No, he roared his mind. He believed that every capitulation, large and small, was tallied somewhere, each one a new link in a chain that choked off creativity. His refusal to play along cost him, personally and professionally, but he wouldn't complain and he wouldn't change. He lived the way he made movies. At times it was messy, but it was completely of his own design. There's no way to replicate in print what Bob accomplished on film and in life, but an oral biography seemed the next best thing. I hope he'd agree. In the transcripts of our talks, there's a passage that I've reread more times than I care to admit. It's an interruption, really, the sort of thing a transcriptionist usually omits. But for some reason it's there, embedded in a discussion about viewing an artist's work through the prism of his life. "Excuse me," Bob says, reaching for a ringing phone. It's his producer, Ren Arthur. "Let me call you back," he tells her. "Mitch is here on the floor next to me. I'm lying on the couch and he's sitting on the floor, and our heads are next to each other." I've held on to that moment, trying to keep my head next to Bob's, to fairly yet fully explore his work and his life. Mitchell Zuckoff, Boston, 2009.
Act 1, 1925 to 1969.
Kansas City. Robert Altman.
Kansas City? Everything's up to date in Kansas City. They've gone about as far as they could go. They went and built a skyscraper 7 stories high, about as high as a building ought to grow. They got a big theater that they call a burlesque queue. For 50 cents you could see a dandy show. Yep, Kansas City. I think it was a rather uneventful American middle-class community I grew up in. I don't think it makes a hell of a lot of difference where you grow up, except if you can't shake the prejudicial influences. Whether it was Kansas City or Bangladesh. If you grew up in an Amish family in Pennsylvania and you're 50 years old today, even if you shed all the main tenets of what you learned, you still retain something of that. A lot has to do with how strong the influences are, where you were placed in the world, and whether you're inhibited by that perspective. Have I shaken these influences? I don't know that I have, really.
Catherine Reed Altman, wife.
Kansas City, born and bred. He's the boy next door. He was very influential.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?